Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagra. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Monday, April 1st. And, of course, the day as I say, no, it isn't. Yes, it is. Ha, caught you, April Fool's Day. Yeah, so the worst day on the internet, and it's out there, and there's nothing we can do about it. And luckily, so far, I haven't gone looking, and I'm going to try and remember not to go looking for internet April Fool's Day jokes and try and figure out what people are thinking or try and see if they can fool me because, well, you know, who can tell the difference between reality and, I don't know, something AI made up or whether or not AI made up reality for that matter. There's no telling. In the Trump era and very frequently, well, the internet is filled with people who don't quite get in my opinion, don't quite get the April Fool's concept anyway. It's not lie and see if you can get away with it. And then if you get caught, say April Fools. That's not what the concept is about. Nor is it, as my kids always used to say, you know this from hearing me talk about it for years now. Nor is it about saying, well, I'd like to have pizza for lunch today. April Fools, no, I wouldn't. But the internet is filled with things that are plausible claims, and then they say, all right, well, I actually just made that one up. So, well, look, I'm sick and tired of that one. And hopefully I can avoid the rest of it for the day and not catch up on it. But I assume that social media will be filled not only with those kinds of jokes, but other people pointing out how terrible some of them are, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, it occurs to me now, just as I'm getting on the air and I'm checking around to see, well, what hints am I being given by Justice about things that interest him today, and what about Greg? And then I realize, oh yeah, right, it's the big, well, it's not the holiday weekend, but we're in the aftermath, and he's got family visiting, and so I'm on my own today. But of course he has left behind the abbreviated pundit roundup, and I don't want to take away all the good stuff for Wednesday, but I'm pretty sure news will happen in between now and then. So it might be okay to lean on him for his roundup. But of course, we don't even necessarily need that because the internet, as it turns out, is full of news. And it was an eventful weekend and a very active weekend on social media. For whatever reason, some of the things that I had to say kind of caught fire. So that was kind of interesting. And watching people enjoy that was always fun. And I guess... well, the big thing that caught on over the weekend is probably a good topic for discussion. There was a New York Times article. Can you believe it? They didn't view Trump correctly, in my opinion. It's hard to believe, I know. But this piece got a lot of discussion for a lot of reasons, and all the usual New York Times reasons. It did do good reporting in that it highlighted a real problem. Then it did regular New York Times, the New York Times trick of somewhere between both sidesing it or downplaying the threat of what was happening and framing Trump lunacy as... in normalization terms. I don't know. I'm losing track of how I wanted to say it, but this is the piece. It is titled "Some Potential Trump Witnesses," because remember, he's on trial in like 15,000 different places, get carrots. Some witnesses get carrots. Michael Cohen got the stick, which is true and an important point, but probably not the headline feature I would have gone with, but you know, we're rarely going to agree on something like that. So what is this about? Well, it'll reveal itself, but it is interesting that they chose to focus on Michael Cohen, who got the stick. I could see where they would be like, well, shouldn't we be highlighting the one that was the stick? The carrot, who cares about the carrot? We want to talk about mean, bad, vindictive Trump, who gets himself in trouble. The problem is that the carrot in this case is probably more dangerous and perhaps even more illegal than the stick was in any of this. And you'll see why if you haven't read the article already. The subheader, former President Donald J. Trump, and so you can now imagine both carrot and stick are illegal, has taken different approaches. There's your characteristic New York Times downplaying of what's going on. Trump has taken different approaches to those who may testify at his trials. Some he attacks publicly, others he rewards for loyalty, which is a way of putting it, I guess. But it's problematic. So who's writing here? Ben Protis, William K. Rashbaum. I guess if people put their middle initial in there, I owe it to them to read it. I very often skip it. I find it weird, but if you want it in there, you got it. Maggie Haberman, who doesn't, Jonathan Swan, and Alan Feuer are co-byliners on all of this. And here's the story. Donald J. Trump, and you know who he is, right? Watched anxiously from the White House in April 2018 as news broke about federal agents searching the home of Michael D. Cohen. I don't think that's a matter of please put my middle initial in there. That's just Times things for whatever reason. Anyway, the man who, of course, was entrusted to conceal some of the president's deepest secrets, including hooking up with a porn star. But, that's neither here nor there. After initially coming to Mr. Cohen's defense, Mr. Trump washed his hands of his fixer within weeks, brushing aside Mr. Cohen's feelers about a pardon and disavowing his legal bills, which probably should. But anyway, Mr. Trump, here's the interesting thing. He took a different tack, you might say. He took a different tack when prosecutors shifted their scrutiny to Alan H. Weisselberg, the Trump family's longtime financial gatekeeper. Mr. Trump's company paid Mr. Weisselberg's legal bills and awarded him a $2 million severance with a condition. And here's the condition. He could not voluntarily cooperate with any law enforcement agency. Now, there's a whole article that follows this, and I don't even know if I've made it all the way through the whole article because it's too infuriating, but that sort of stopped me in my tracks, and I guess what caught fire on social media was a post saying, so, a sitting president forced his business associate to sign a 7-figure severance agreement that included a provision prohibiting him from cooperating with any law enforcement agency. Is that right? Do I have that correct? And this guy ran for president again? Twice? Like, this is his third run for the presidency. This is a person who, asking to be chief executive, the top of the food chain, the law enforcement officer at the top of it all. I mean, I guess everybody considers the Attorney General as the chief law enforcement officer, but of course the Attorney General reports to the president. But you know how. Well, what did Jeffrey Clark say the other day? Did we quote him in the on Friday? The unitary, the head of the executive branch, the unitary executive, the sole head of the unitary branch, yada, yada, blah, 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 that he was going over. I think so, right? And this is the person in charge of everything, of seeing all those laws be faithfully executed, the way the oath says, although it just says the Constitution. Anyway, this is a major party nominee, 3 times now, who has forced business associates to sign a $2 million bribe agreement not to cooperate with any law enforcement agency. By the way, Trump also spent his weekend at a cop funeral in Long Island. So, blah, blah, blah. Here's your thin blue lie for you. I support the cops, except when it comes to my guys getting in trouble. I then pay them $2 million not to cooperate with the people I'm marching with here and burying. Anyway, the point really is, and there's lots to say about the cop funeral thing. This is clearly a bribe. Now, I did have to double back because as I read through the article again, it starts out, right, by saying, he's watching anxiously from the White House in April of 2018. And I was like, okay. So in 2018, he decides, I'm going to treat Weisselberg differently than Cohen and give him this $2 million contract not to cooperate with any law enforcement agency. But that doesn't happen until last year. The next paragraph begins after Mr. Weisselberg signed the deal last year. Okay, so in 2023, he eventually signs this deal. But that only ends up making it worse, as it turns out. But even so, so he wasn't a sitting president, although he was pretty sure he was a sitting president. He claimed to be the president at the time, but so not a sitting president when the deal was signed. But currently, of course, as I said, the major party nominee for president for the third time. And at the same time, facing 80 plus criminal and civil charges in 4 different jurisdictions or whatever it is, some even stemming directly from this very decision, this very outrage in terms of paying off Weisselberg to keep his mouth shut. But nonetheless, a major party nominee, and also not made explicit in the headline. Remember that the headline of this story has a mention in it, but it's Michael Cohen and him getting the stick. Some potential Trump witnesses get carrots. Michael Cohen got the stick. So we could go find out what the stick is, but the carrot's illegal. That's the point. Like, this is like classic textbook obstruction of justice. I will only pay you if you agree not to cooperate with law enforcement, even though I aspire to be the top law enforcement officer of the entire country and take personal responsibility that the laws be faithfully executed. But I'm lying. I mean, that's kind of a big deal. And, well, as a result, I think a lot of people did kind of sit up and take notice. This was something that got, 300 reposts on Blue Sky and 1,000 likes, which, you know, for engagement on Blue Sky, that's pretty major. I've seen those numbers on the other place back in the day, but nothing like that for me anyway on Blue Sky. So that certainly seemed to, I don't know, that triggered something for people, and I got a lot of reposts and comments and likes from political science professors all over the country, all over not all over the world, but certainly all over the United States and Canada and Western Europe, where they, you know, had been keeping abreast of such things. It's really rather astonishing, and perhaps we should read on because it's a great topic. And I definitely read a significant chunk of it, but I mean, I can't get past the fact that there's this $2 million severance package that's contingent on Weisselberg not cooperating with any law enforcement agency. That's astonishing for somebody who, you know, purports right now to have won the 2020 election and who is asking to be made president of the United States again, even though he keeps thinking that he is. And by the way, yes, also over the weekend, for those of you who think it's clever to say, well, if he thinks he won the election, then he knows he's ineligible to run in 2024. The American Conservative, is that the publication? I don't know. I forget, but we can find it again as we scroll back and look for it. But yeah, they are joining actually a growing chorus among so-called conservatives for repealing the 22nd Amendment, which prohibits anyone from holding the office of the presidency more than 2 full terms, or to be elected to the position. And by the way, so not only are they calling for its repeal, which is a tall order to be sure, but the idea being to get that barrier out of the way so that there can be a 3rd, 4th, 5th Trump term when he's 900 years old and they have to take him to a taxidermist and they're just carrying him around pretending he's alive. And by the way, I mean, I guess at bottom, do you think that if Trump had a stroke and was completely incapacitated, do you think that they wouldn't have some kind of Dave the movie situation going on? At the minimum, sort of keeping him under wraps in a hospital bed in the White House and just telling everybody he's fine, he just doesn't want to come out. He's playing golf in secret. I don't know. What would you know that they would hold on to that? And it would be, I wonder who would be pulling the strings in that situation. His vice president? I mean, he doesn't seem to he didn't value his other vice president. A family member? Which family member, if any? I don't know. Or would it be a political advisor or a political guru? Would it be Steve Bannon? Would it be Trump Jr.? Would it be, I don't know who. Lara? She's co-chair of the RNC now. I don't know whether he considers that to be an important position or not. It's just good for stealing money. Anyway, so what's the difference between the way he treated Cohen and Weisselberg? Well, we'll find out. Remember, the New York Times says it's just a different tack. One of the other things that caught on over the weekend is saying, well, you know, some people back in the day would pay the sex workers of the day and have their intercourse and then go happily about the rest of their day. But one Victorian gentleman took a different tack with the prostitutes of London. We report on that now. It took a different tack. Okay. Well, anyway, so Weisselberg signed this deal last year. Oh, and I guess I'll get around to this detail. So he signed the deal last year. Mr. Trump's lawyers privately pressed him to testify in a civil fraud case filed against the former president, hoping the finance chief's testimony would aid their defense. And I guess it didn't. According to people with knowledge of the discussions, which have not previously been reported. But prosecutors say Mr. Weisselberg lied during his testimony, because that's what he was paid to do. Lied during his testimony, and this month he pleaded guilty to perjury. The fixer and the money man, that's Cohen and Weisselberg, both landed behind bars, but while Mr. Weisselberg remained loyal, refusing to implicate his boss, Mr. Cohen is poised to become a central witness for the Manhattan District Attorney at Mr. Trump's criminal trial next month, the first prosecution of a former U.S. president. By the way, that's now this month. It is April 1st. I'm not kidding. And the trial date is, in fact, not an April Fool's joke, scheduled to begin on April 15th. 2 weeks, now we can say hence. 2 weeks hence. And hence, that's good news. I don't know. Anyway, or hence I feel good about that news. How about that? All right. Well, anyway, as we were saying, the carrot and the stick, I guess, they're both in jail. So neither one was helped out with that. But as others pointed out to me after my comment about this whole construction, they said, well, actually, okay, so the deal was signed last year, and what's really interesting is $2 million severance package in exchange for not cooperating with any law enforcement agency. And then, of course, he didn't, and he lied, and he's now in jail for perjury, and he got $2 million. But $2 million, others pointed out, is, as it happens, it is the amount of Weisselberg's back tax liability, as found by the court. In addition to landing him in jail for perjury, he got hit with a $2 million back tax bill in the course of this investigation, and then got a windfall of $2 million, strangely, from the Trump organization, on the condition that he make the whole thing worse by perjuring himself, but make the whole thing worse for himself. Go to jail as a perjurer so that Donald Trump doesn't go to jail as a fraudster. And he took that $2 million. And there's probably a lot more behind that $2 million because, of course, it evaporated pretty quickly. And he didn't net the $2 million. He gave it away to the federal government, presumably, if he paid his tax bill. I don't really know how he could avoid it at this point if he's in their custody, but that's, I will point out, I don't know for sure that he has cut that check to the IRS. Anyway, so as we said, the fixer and the money man both landed behind bars, but while Weisselberg remained loyal, supposedly, Cohen became a central witness. He didn't get a carrot, and now he's a witness against Trump. The contrasting cases of Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg, detailed in court records and interviews with 18 people directly involved in the cases. 18, that's high. Good for Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg. Some of whom requested anonymity to discuss confidential conversations demonstrate the power and peril of Mr. Trump's tactics for avoiding a crisis like the one he now faces. Well, that's one way of putting it, I guess. I mean, I don't think he's avoided this crisis, but, and he's, in some cases, he's just transferred the crisis to someone else. You go to jail. You have a crisis. He hasn't really, but he personally has avoided the crisis, but someone's paying, and I don't know how long they're going to want to continue paying. Anyway, Mr. Trump's tactics for avoiding a crisis, yada yada. The trial in which Mr. Trump is accused of covering up a sex scandal surrounding the 2016 presidential campaign, Stormy Daniels, is the realization of his long-held fear that prosecutors would flip trusted aides into dangerous witnesses. But, yeah, but that's the nature of criminal conspiracy, right? I mean, well, I have that fear, so I'll do what I can to make sure that they don't flip on me. Well, but that's one of the problems with conspiracy. First of all, I mean, or I'll say it this way, not least of which is that they can charge you criminally with that conspiracy, no matter what you're conspiring to do. If you conspire to do it, you can be charged with conspiracy, and that's on purpose. It's designed to get at people who think that they can avoid crisis by paying other people to go to jail for them. That's the point of the law. So, maybe we should get around to getting to work on that one. The former president, facing 4 indictments and several lawsuits while seeking to reclaim the White House, careens from one case to the next, seeking to exert control, or rather, I would say extort control over witnesses. In screeds posted on his social media site, he mixes enticements with threats, praise with scorn, and when all else fails, he makes life miserable for anyone audacious enough to cross him. Mr. Trump's company praised Mr. Weisselberg as a fine and honorable man who happens to be in prison for perjury, despite the honorability, I guess. But Mr. Cohen felt the brunt of the former president's attacks. Mr. Trump has sued him, called him a rat, and referred to him as death. Which, I mean, granted, they're both in jail. It's not as though he traded the sticks and stones from Trump and leveraged that to stay out of jail, whereas Weisselberg isn't being attacked but is in jail. They both ended up in jail, so I suppose you might as well be getting praised while you're in jail. But in the end, we'll see. I mean, we'll see who spends longer in jail and what becomes of them in the end. I guess time will tell. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to find out that the person who agreed to help him cheat even more made out better, but there's still hope. Anyway, that aggressive approach, as the Times puts it, stick rather than carrot, will be tested at the Manhattan criminal trial and at others that may follow in Florida, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. Despite Mr. Trump's public lashing of Mr. Cohen and others, they are still set to testify against him. The former president's attacks now might put him in even greater legal jeopardy. On Tuesday, the judge in the Manhattan case issued a gag order that bars Mr. Trump from assailing potential witnesses and labeled his invective threatening, inflammatory, denigrating. Stephen Chung, the sound of that, hopefully, prison door slamming closed behind him. Stephen Chung, the spokesperson for Mr. Trump's campaign, did not respond to a request for comment, but he criticized the gag order previously as unconstitutional because reasons. The reason being it prevented Mr. Trump from engaging in core political speech, which is entitled to the highest level of protection under the First Amendment, but subject to a test. But unfortunately, the test is run by the Supreme Court of the United States, so he might be right, even though he's actually wrong. We're pre-wrong, you see, and our positions will perhaps switch later on. But yeah, by the way, about that gag order, Trump spent the weekend violating that as well, and we'll see. And likewise, the judge then spent the weekend pondering, am I serious about this gag order or am I not? I don't know what to do. Nobody's ever put a former president in jail. That's true, but no former president has ever done this repeatedly. But, you can't blame the judge, right? How is a federal judge supposed to know? Well, he's a state judge. How is any judge really supposed to know that a lack of consequences for bad activity might result in recidivism? They don't know that. No one has ever discussed that concept with them. Someone should write a book about crime, but also about punishment. And we should see whether there's any correlation there. Anyway, the prosecution's potential witness list for the Manhattan trial is expected to resemble a 2016-era roster of Mr. Trump's employees, campaign aides, and friends, because they were all witnesses to the crime, obviously. Mr. Cohen will testify that Mr. Trump helped orchestrate a hush money deal with Stormy Daniels, the porn star, at the center of the case. Ms. Daniels may well testify, or may testify as well, David Pecker, remember that guy? Former National Enquirer publisher who was once friends with Mr. Trump is now expected to tell the jury that he helped initiate that deal and buried other damaging stories for Mr. Trump. And it'd be fun to find out what those stories were. And how does she do it? How does she do it? Hope Hicks, another former campaign and White House aide to Mr. Trump, may be called to shed light on the tumultuous period, or she may be called upon to accept $2 million not to shed light. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Carrot or stick, or both, or neither, or I'm going to hit you with a carrot. I mean, there's nothing that says you can't hit a person with a carrot. It's a pretty good idea, as a matter of fact. Here, would you like a carrot? Carrot's a treat, right? April Fool, whack! I just hit you with the carrot. Carrot is actually a punishment. In Trump world, that may very well be true. All right, well, we'll come back to this article. We'll come back to the other subjects. Yes, of course, Trump already in violation. Oh, I would have thought, by the way, he should have taken advantage of this judge. Would have been a great time on Saturday of Easter weekend to put him in jail for contempt and then say, court's closed Sunday, can't help you. See you on Monday. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KGrowX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the K-Grow in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I'm pondering the different possibilities. I guess we continue with this article just because it was so astonishing, but for only perhaps a little while, because there's so many other things to get to. But, this occupied a lot of time and is tied to a lot of the things that happened over the weekend. And it was a relatively quiet weekend despite the fact that Trump is alive, because it was Easter weekend and people's attentions were elsewhere for the most part. But when we left off here, Hope Hicks had been mentioned, and that's an amazing thing all by itself. Mr. Weisselberg is not expected to testify for either side in the Stormy Daniels trial, apparently. Although prosecutors have sought his help for years, how does a sentence end? He has repeatedly rebuffed them, disputing Mr. Cohen's account of the hush money deal and contending that he has no decisive information to offer. Given his guilty plea to perjury and his financial dependence on the Trumps, he would not make a particularly credible defense witness either. That's probably true. But again, the point of this paragraph, don't we sort of feel like maybe another end to that sentence was necessary? Mr. Weisselberg is not expected to testify for either side. Although prosecutors have sought his help for years, he has been paid by the former president not to cooperate with them. It was in the second paragraph. He got a $2 million severance package from the Trump Organization that was contingent on his agreeing never to voluntarily help any law enforcement agency. So when we say, well, although prosecutors have sought his help for years, that's an amazing end to the sentence to then turn and say, well, he's rebuffed them. That's true. And he's disputed Cohen's account of the hush money deal. That is also true. And contended that he had no decisive information to offer. He's probably said that, although that part isn't true. That part has another factor in there. He has contended that he has no decisive information. That part, it's true that he's contended it. It's false that it was correct that he has no other information. But again, the whole point of this article, like I would have thought, had I been employed by the New York Times, would be to point out that he's been paid $2 million to lie and cover up this story. And how many paragraphs are we even into this thing? It's not that far. Well, there's no point in counting the paragraphs really at this point. But honestly, like, why isn't that the sentence in here? That, yeah, I mean, it's also true that given his guilty plea to perjury and his financial dependence on the Trumps, i.e. he's taken a $2 million bribe from them not to cooperate, he would not make a particularly credible defense witness either. True, but he should be a defendant in this case, a co-defendant in this case. But I don't have anything else, material to add to the case. Well, we don't really know that, do we? We do know that you were paid $2 million not to testify in another case. I think you have information about this. Or honestly, whether or not I have any idea whether you have this information or not, I'm in an excellent position to say you do. And when you say you don't, if you were telling the truth, which I really doubt, I would still say, I don't know whether I believe that. You're a convicted perjurer who took $2 million to keep his mouth shut. I think you do have material information. I think you're a co-conspirator in this case. And I know there's various risks to actually charging somebody like that, which is, the main one of which is no one will, I don't know. They all screw up. So they might actually F this up and actually give away evidence that he is a co-conspirator. But if they did their jobs right, you'd come away empty-handed on the evidence connecting Weisselberg to the operation that involved Cohen to cover up the Stormy Daniels story. Weisselberg had to have had something to do with it because too much money was moving around for him not to know. But if he refuses to acknowledge that he had a hand in it and everybody else says he didn't, you might end up not convicting him of this conspiracy, which would then lead jurors to say, well, one of the guys in this is going to end up not guilty. What about the other guy? Maybe he's not guilty too, even though there's plenty of evidence against him. Jurors think weird things. They do. Mr. Trump's lawyers have portrayed Mr. Weisselberg as a victim of prosecutorial overreach as opposed to the victim of extortion from Trump. But that's not how Trump's lawyers are going to play it, obviously. But Mr. Cohen, they portray as an opportunistic liar who has admitted to perjury. But I mean, didn't Weisselberg, in the end, did he plead not guilty and just get convicted? I mean, however you want to put it. Well, Cohen is an opportunistic liar who has admitted to perjury. Well, Weisselberg's an opportunistic liar who wouldn't admit to perjury but got convicted of it nonetheless. Or maybe he even did confess to perjury. But again, they're not. The role of the Trump attorneys is not to tell the truth and an accurate story that takes into account both sides, for instance, which we're just now being pissed off at the New York Times for trying to do. But anyway, I get to do it, and they don't. You understand. They note that Mr. Cohen, whose memoir is titled Disloyal, pleaded guilty to federal charges involving the hush money deal, as well as personal financial crimes unrelated to Mr. Trump, whereas Weisselberg has pleaded not guilty to federal charges involving the hush money, well, not the hush money deal, but other deals, as well as personal financial crimes related to Mr. Trump, but ended up convicted of them nonetheless. Mr. Trump has never said that refusing to pay more than $1 million of Mr. Cohen's legal bills was short-sighted, but Mr. Cohen has told people that it was the biggest mistake the former president ever made, which is really not great, not cool. Mr. Trump has, however, wondered aloud whether it might have been possible to handle Mr. Cohen differently to keep him loyal. And Mr. Cohen's break from Mr. Trump helped inform how Mr. Trump has handled other witnesses, i.e. the other guy in this story. Yes, of course. This, according to a person with knowledge of the former president's thinking. However, a person with knowledge of any kind, a thinking, sentient, breathing human being would say, yeah, Mr. Cohen's break from Mr. Trump helped inform Mr. Trump how to handle other witnesses differently. His political action committee has paid more than $50 million in legal fees, mostly for aides and employees who are now witnesses in the case against Mr. Trump. While Mr. Trump's legal fate is still undecided, Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg had their lives upended and their freedom revoked. I was the first lamb led to the slaughterhouse, Mr. Cohen said in an interview. And I guess we'll learn his story now under the section of the story entitled The Fixer. It was Mr. Cohen's loyalty that first caught Mr. Trump's eye nearly 2 decades ago. We're going to get backstory here now. Mr. Trump was embroiled in a dispute over control of the condo board at his tower across from the United Nations when Mr. Cohen, a former personal injury lawyer, the best kind of lawyer, who had bought several Trump apartments, for some strange reason, helped him win. The feat earned him a job at the Trump Organization, and the next decade of Mr. Cohen's professional life was an act of devotion to the real estate mogul turned reality television star turned presidential candidate. But Mr. Cohen ultimately concluded that his loyalty was not being reciprocated, setting in motion the events that led to the Manhattan criminal trial, which is scheduled to begin on April 15th. The case stems, of course, from the 2016 presidential campaign when, behind the scenes, Cohen was cleaning up his candidate's messes. And one of the more disgusting messes I've heard about in a long time. I was just thinking about that at the end of the week. We must have talked about it probably on the air, but in cleaned up terms, perhaps. I don't know. But just as I'm pondering the persistent Adam Kinzinger story that Donald Trump emanates a powerful and repulsive odor these days, I was just sort of curious whether any reporters might wonder, did you smell this bad when you... where's my censoring horn? Do I have that handy? When you were with, let's say, Stormy Daniels. I'm just sort of curious about that. But to shout that out, and I know most reporters aren't willing to do that. But by the way, you don't think Howard Stern can't make this happen? He doesn't have somebody on his staff who can be on hand and say, Mr. Trump, did you smell this bad when you Stormy Daniels? I just want to know. America needs to find out. I'm just curious about this story, though, the Kinzinger story, just because I can't believe that it would actually be true that he could be in public and run into so many people and nobody else appears to have anything to say about it. But I know that the problem is that, mainstream reporters are going to be like, well, we can't talk about that. That's somehow wrong to discuss. But I don't know. Repulsive odor? Why not? Why not make mention of it? You can be fair to your journalistic instinct. And by the way, if you are interviewing him and he appears not to emanate a fantastic odor, say so. I mean, be true to your journalistic principles. Don't lie. I'm not saying you should say he stinks if he doesn't. You could say, despite recent reports that wherever he goes, Trump emanates a foul odor of sewer gas, it turns out, at least today, it wasn't true. This reporter witnessed no such stench wafting off of the candidate. Fine, go ahead and say so. Be honest. I don't mind. I'm not going to stop you. I'm not asking you to lie. Tell the truth. Go ahead. Anyway, right, back to the story. Cohen was cleaning up the candidates' messes, some of which probably involve bodily stench. Mr. Pecker, the National Enquirer publisher, alerted Mr. Cohen to one such mess that October. Ms. Daniels was interested in selling her story of a sexual encounter with Mr. Trump. And I know people, I guess Trump fans are upset about that, and maybe even some people who don't count themselves as Trump fans. Well, why are you who cares? Why are you selling such a story? Remember that Stormy Daniels' line of work, I know, porn star, we all know what that means, what that entails, and we think of the mechanics of her job. But her job is selling stories about sexual encounters, is it not? So don't be terribly surprised that she shows up at the office of the National Enquirer and says, instead of a film, I'd like to sell a novella. Right. Okay. It just happens to be based on a true story. And I'll try not to embellish it because, maybe for the National Enquirer, it's okay to embellish it. They don't mind. But anyway, yeah. So sure, it's perhaps you could say it's nobody's business but their own. Well, that's true. But remember what her business is. It sort of occurred to me now for the first time. That's her job, selling stories about sexual encounters. The threat came as the campaign reeled from the release of the infamous Access Hollywood recording that captured Mr. Trump boasting about groping women. That was a good 1-2 punch. Soon after, Mr. Cohen negotiated a $130,000 hush money deal. Mr. Cohen put up the money, and Mr. Trump reimbursed him. But Mr. Trump's company falsely recorded the reimbursements in its books as legal expenses. The hush money caught the attention of the federal authorities, leading them in April of 2018 to search Mr. Cohen's home and office, a hotel room where he was staying, and a safe deposit box. Initially sympathetic, Mr. Trump called Mr. Cohen a good man, and the search a disgraceful situation. He also called Mr. Cohen with a message. He called him on the phone, that is, stay strong. And the Trump Organization paid for Mr. Cohen's main lawyer. He was attempting to give him the carrot that he gave Mr. Weisselberg, but something went wrong somewhere along the line. Mr. Trump's advisors were concerned about witness tampering accusations, and so he stopped reaching out. Their relationship soon soured. In other words, that's the problem with the carrot, the so-called carrot approach, is you have to keep nurturing that connection, if not the carrot itself. And when you turn off the spigot, you turn off the loyalty. So it's, long term, it's probably worse. It may cost him more money in the long run with Weisselberg. They'll have to keep paying him in order to keep him quiet. But I don't know. I guess he's willing to gamble that because he's 78 years old and in terrible shape and may never live to see the consequences. I don't know. Or either that or, their bet is, well, I'll become dictator and wipe out all the potential consequences with so-called legal authority granted to me by the Constitution. Anyway, so yeah, Trump's advisors are rightly concerned about witness tampering because it is witness tampering. And they said, don't tamper with witnesses. Don't get in that trouble. But instead, you got in trouble based on the fact that the witness that you were no longer tampering with might actually tell the truth because they were depending on your tampering in order to keep them from telling their story. When Mr. Trump called into one of his favorite television shows, why is this even happening? Fox and Friends, a few weeks after the search, he distanced himself from Mr. Cohen, who said he had just handled a tiny little fraction of his legal work, adding, from what I understand, they're looking at his businesses. I'm not involved, Mr. Trump added 3 times, but of course, the whole transaction they were looking at was on his behalf. He was involved. It was him, ing Stormy Daniels in the middle of all this. So yeah, he was involved. At the time, People close to Mr. Trump were dangling possible presidential pardons to advisors who had been caught up in criminal investigations. Mr. Cohen dispatched lawyers to ask whether Mr. Trump was open to giving him one, but the response from Mr. Trump's then personal lawyer, Rudolph W. Giuliani, ever heard of him, was that discussion of a pardon was premature. I think it's interesting how quickly they then handed out pardons at the end of his term, but I think what Mr. Giuliani may have been saying is, what's in it for me? Where's my pay? I'll talk to him about a pardon if I get paid. The final straw, Mr. Cohen said, came when Trump Organization stopped paying his main lawyer in June of 2018. The company reasoned that it already had spent more than $1 million on the lawyer and that Mr. Cohen was facing prosecution for his own business dealings in addition to the hush money deal. Mr. Cohen soon hired Lanny J. Davis, a veteran Washington lawyer, terrible person, generally speaking, and public relations strategist with close ties to Democratic politicians, and was telling friends that he was willing to cooperate with prosecutors, because that's the way he gets himself out of trouble. When he pleaded guilty to federal charges that August, Cohen pointed the finger at Mr. Trump, saying he had paid the hush money at the direction of his former boss, an accusation he is expected to repeat on the witness stand in the Manhattan trial. A spokeswoman for Alvin L. Bragg, the Manhattan district attorney, declined to comment before going to prison. Mr. Cohen also appeared before Congress, where he was asked who else had worked on the hush money deal. His answer? Mr. Weisselberg. By the way, what's Mr. Weisselberg's answer? I didn't have anything to do with it. I have no further information. I'm being paid $2 million to say I have no further information to give you. Prosecutors are puzzled by all of this somehow, apparently, according to, what was that paragraph that we read a while back? I kind of have to scroll back, but I know it's a distraction, but I kind of want to read it again now. Where is that one? It's up here somewhere. Oh, yes. Mr. Weisselberg is not expected to testify for either side. Although prosecutors sought his help for years, and we will rewrite this one, he was paid $2 million not to give it to them. And he has disputed Mr. Cohen's account to the hush money deal, contending that he has no decisive information to offer. What does Mr. Cohen say? Mr. Cohen says the other person involved in this deal was, the finance person. And remember, this is a big financial payment being doled out to someone in exchange for an important transaction. There's little chance that the money man doesn't know what's going on. Cohen fronted the money. Trump reimbursed him. You think Trump opened his wallet and took out $130,000 in cash and gave it to him? Weisselberg fixed that. Now they move on at that point to describing the money man. We'll read a little bit of this too. After spending decades in relative anonymity as Mr. Trump's finance chief, Mr. Weisselberg now had a target on his back, and in prison as well. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office had come to view Mr. Weisselberg, whose relationship with the Trump family had begun under Mr. Trump's father nearly a half century before, as a linchpin in its investigation of the former president. When he rebuffed the prosecutors in exchange for a $2 million payment, he was indicted on tax fraud charges. He pleaded guilty in 2022, and let's just point out here, because it doesn't appear to be said here. All right, he pleaded guilty in 2022 to tax fraud charges. What happened? He pleaded guilty. All right, well, then he was sentenced. Yeah. Was he fined? Did he have to pay back taxes? Yes. How much? $2 million, right? Now let's continue reading. While Mr. Weisselberg was serving time at the Rikers Island jail complex early last year, prosecutors offered him a path to freedom, turn on Mr. Trump, but that path was closed. How was it closed? They do report it. The day before he arrived at Rikers, Mr. Weisselberg had signed the $2 million severance deal with its provision against cooperation. Well, I mean, a couple of things here. It would be worth pointing out he has to pay back taxes. That's part of the deal. It was $2 million. That's part of the deal. And then he was handed $2 million in exchange for a provision against cooperation. And then, of course, we launch into the other thing that people responded to me with in all this. That's unenforceable. It's an illegal contract. Yes. That's true. But it's worth pointing out, perhaps, at some point in the middle of all this, well, they just present it like, well, he didn't cooperate because he had a contract that said don't cooperate. Well, holy mackerel, that's totally illegal. It's obstruction of justice. It's conspiracy to obstruct justice. It's conspiracy to commit this, whatever fraud crimes were involved in the hush money payments in the first place. It's a number of really problematic things happening here. On top of it all this is a person who was president of the United States and purports to have won the election in 2020 and would like to be elected in 2024. That's astonishing. But yeah, well, he couldn't. He was prevented. Isn't that interesting? That path was closed. It wasn't closed. It was not closed. There's nothing legal standing in the way of this. But yeah, people were pointing out it's unenforceable. And while true, remember also, related to our standing problems and trying to explain standing to people, this is a similar exercise. Is it an unenforceable contract? Yeah. Why? Because it suborns perjury, and that's an illegal act, and you can't really make a contract for that and keep it binding. But the problem is being released from such a contract on the grounds that it's unenforceable is a prerogative that belongs to one of the parties to the contract. In fact, in this case, presumably Weisselberg. I don't know how well it goes over that the Trump organization, for instance, if they were brought up on charges, they couldn't say, well, you can't charge us with a crime here. That contract is illegal. I mean, unenforceable. Did I say illegal? Yeah. Well, that's why we're charging you. The contract is illegal. It's also unenforceable. It's unenforceable because it's illegal. But yeah, let's not forget the fact that it's illegal. So they're unlikely to say so. But Weisselberg wants to comply. He's loyal to Trump. He thinks that he'll get more money later and or his family won't be murdered by Russian mobsters if he cooperates. But people are pointing out, well, that it's unenforceable. That means Weisselberg can pocket the $2 million and then talk to the cops. And then what, is Trump going to sue him for the $2 million back? He probably will. But he's not going to win because it's illegal and an unenforceable contract. Yep. And then he'll have his head chopped off and he'll be dumped in the East River. And so will the rest of his family. But okay, it's unenforceable. So who's going to say so? Yeah. So it's kind of beside the point that it's unenforceable, but it's interesting, if only because it brings up the illegality of the whole thing. But anyway, that's not even discussed in this article. The money, the $2 million, apparently, for one thing, paid in installments. That's, of course, Trump thinking he's a genius. Well, I'll make sure that he doesn't figure out that the contract is unenforceable, take the $2 million, and then speak to the police. I will give him, $100,000, and then if he blabs, I won't give him the rest. Well, that will work as between the two of you, but that doesn't make the agreement any more legal or any less dirty looking. But it does help explain, well, if it's not enforceable, why doesn't Weisselberg just steal the money? Among other reasons, he doesn't get to steal the whole amount, as it turns out. And while the Trump organization agreed to pay Mr. Weisselberg's lawyers, there was a caveat. The company must approve the selection of employees' counsel, which of course means that it's the company's counsel, not the employees. That's just one of the things you also learn in law school, right? If you want a lawyer to be representing your interests, you have to be paying that lawyer, essentially. Or else believe that for whatever reason, some other entity is paying for your lawyer, and out of the goodness of their heart, they just have your best interests in mind and not theirs. But that's not usually the reason people pay lawyers. They usually pay lawyers to represent their interests. If they think or they convince you that your interests overlap, one, they are lying, but two, they are winning. You're not supposed to accept payment for your legal representation from others and simultaneously believe that they definitely do have your best interests solely at heart. They likely will not, and the ethical obligation will be to the person paying them on the part of the attorney for the most part, so watch out. If that were not incentive enough to remain loyal, the article continues, one of Mr. Weisselberg's sons works for the company, the Trump organization. So, there's that threat being held out over his head as well. Still, when Mr. Weisselberg returned home from Rikers last April, prosecutors tried a final squeeze. Unless he talked, they warned, he would now face a new round of charges for misleading investigators over the years. The threat could not have come at a worse moment for Mr. Weisselberg. The New York Attorney General's office, which had sued Mr. Trump and Mr. Weisselberg for fraudulently inflating the former president's net worth, was set to question the one-time finance chief under oath in a deposition soon after his release from jail. Mr. Weisselberg's criminal lawyers expressed concerns about his testifying. Doing so would expose Mr. Weisselberg to perjury charges. Yep. Mr. Trump's lawyers were adamant that he testify, noting that if he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, the judge deciding the case could hold it against the defense and doom their case. The Trump lawyers argued that prosecutors could charge Mr. Weisselberg whether or not he testified at the deposition. It was Mr. Weisselberg's decision to make, and he chose to testify. But as his criminal lawyers had feared, the district attorney's office concluded that he had lied, and Mr. Weisselberg pleaded guilty to perjury on March 4th. He will soon return to Rikers. So that answers our question, and I guess explains why I was confused about it. One time he admitted to it, and one time he didn't. But remember that a couple paragraphs before, Mr. Trump's lawyers were saying, you can't believe Cohen, he pleaded guilty to perjury. Yeah, well, Weisselberg just pleaded guilty to perjury too. Well, logic isn't our strong point. The property manager and the vice president is the next section of this article, but I feel like we have spent half the show on it, and maybe that's too much. We'll work our way into a 1-minute break and consider changing directions, if only because there's so much more happening out there that we need to be aware of. All right, well, we'll read a little bit more, and then we'll exit out gently into the 1-minute break. Mr. Trump's divergent approaches, that's all they are, divergent approaches, to Mr. Cohen and Mr. Weisselberg have been replicated in his approach to witnesses in the 2 federal cases against him. The cases brought by Special Counsel Jack Smith include one in Florida, where Mr. Trump is, accused of mishandling classified documents, and one in Washington, where the former president has been charged with, whatever. Oh, yeah, right. Plotting to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Okay, that's actually a major thing. I shouldn't just yada that. All right, well, we'll be right back with more of something. We'll decide what next. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It really is almost time to get rid of this story, but there's not that much more to it, so maybe we can kind of run through the rest of it just in case it ignites any other controversies, and then move on to a few other things. We said, of course, this illustrated divergent approaches, and he's got 2 other federal cases going on, both Jack Smith cases, one in Florida, one in D.C. As Mr. Smith was investigating, Trump used part of his political fundraising operation to pay the legal bills for several former aides, and allies who had been called before grand juries to testify about him. Trump also paid for lawyers for his 2 co-defendants in the classified documents case, Walt Nauta, a personal aide who works for the former president at his Pervalago sex dungeon, and Carlos de Oliveira, the property manager there at the Pervalago sex dungeon. Like Mr. Weisselberg, Mr. Nauta and Mr. de Oliveira are both misters, apparently, and remained loyal, and they're now paying the price. Smith charged both men not only with obstruction of justice, which is true, but also with lying to investigators, which is what they've been paid to do. And like Mr. Cohen, and remember, a lot of this is me helping clarify the New York Times reporting, and you're not going to be able to tell the difference unless you have the article in front of you, but me telling you that's what they've been paid to do, that is true. That is the point of this article. That's the inherent point of this article, but they're just not making it explicit for some reason. And like Mr. Cohen, they continue, The former Trump aides who were possible witnesses against him have felt his wrath on his social media site, Truth Social. Mr. Trump has attacked his vice president, Mike Pence, claiming that Pence has gone to the, quote, dark side. That's the opposite. But again, every Republican accusation is a confession. He has taken aim at his one-time chief of staff, Mark Meadows, whom Mr. Trump likened to weaklings and cowards after fearing that he might be cooperating with federal prosecutors, which, if he has his own lawyers and pays for them himself, he might indeed be doing, because that would be in his self-interest. And after Alyssa Farah, a former White House communications aide who talked to investigators about Trump's actions following the 2020 election, criticized him publicly, he called her a loser. Late last year, Mr. Smith, tiring of the outbursts, told a federal appeals court that the hostility was part of a pattern stretching back years in which people were publicly targeted by Mr. Trump and subject to harassment, threats, and intimidation as a result. Witness tampering. Mr. Smith cited many of the attacks to obtain a gag order against Mr. Trump in the election interference case in Washington. Mr. Trump's documented pattern of speech and its demonstrated real-time, real-world consequences, all true, just not being enforced, pose a significant and imminent threat, an appeals court in Washington wrote in affirming the order. More recently, prosecutors have also sought to protect witnesses in the Florida case. Mr. Smith's team has even opened a separate criminal investigation into threats made on social media against a witness. When the former president's lawyers tried to put the witnesses' names in public court filings, prosecutors complained to the judge overseeing the case. Releasing the names, they said, would risk exposing them to significant and immediate risks of threats, intimidation, and harassment. All true. Good arguments, but keeping in mind that they say without saying it that, the prosecutors complained to the judge overseeing the case. Who's the judge overseeing the case? It's Eileen Cannon, and she's in the tank for Trump, and it's important to note that, and they know you know that, and I hope the best explanation for all of this is that they're giving us all credit for being very smart, observant people with good memories who can put all this stuff together. And I'm sure that the Times legal team is like, don't say any more than that. All the evidence is out there. People can reach this conclusion. If we reach it for them, we'll end up, involved in a lawsuit that will win, but that will cost us money along the way. And they continue, when aides become witnesses, Mr. Trump sometimes seeks to clarify their allegiances. That is an interesting way of putting it. During the documents investigation, his team questioned whether Mr. De Oliveira was loyal. One of Mr. De Oliveira's friends, Brian Butler, responded affirmatively. He would not do anything to jeopardize his relationship with Mr. Trump. Within 15 minutes, Mr. Butler said, Trump called Mr. De Oliveira and offered to get him a lawyer. And that's how it all starts. Because lawyers are big expenses and people don't want to face them alone. And they don't understand that if they're being offered a lawyer paid for by someone with interests divergent at some point from yours, then you are not going to have representation, and they will. And you should not do that. You should not agree to that situation. Okay. So, other things that are happening over the weekend. Well, for one thing, Republicans spent the weekend inventing a new outrage, and it was this. Apparently, March 31st was, according to whom, I don't know. Does it matter? It does not. But it was Transgender Visibility Day, or Transgender Day of Visibility. I don't know exactly what the formal name is. And who knows who even gives out these formal names. I don't even know who to ask, but you get the idea. No matter what you call it, it means the same thing. And okay, that was likely not going to involve a lot of conservatives in the observation of the day. But as it happens through an accident of calendar magic, March 31st, yesterday, was Easter Sunday. So Republicans spent the day manufacturing outrage. How dare Joe Biden, what? How dare Joe Biden make Easter? He intentionally targeted our most sacred of Christian holidays, where we dress up and paint eggs. With Trans Visibility Day, he's doing this to insult us. He knows that transgenderism in general violates all sorts of our religious principles, which that too may also be made up. But okay, it's in their head, and it's your head. I mean, you tell me what's in it. But that was the issue, and they're very big mad about this. And of course, I don't think Joe Biden made it Transgender Visibility Day. I don't know. It could be one of those things where they get a presidential proclamation. Two, my understanding is, well, this isn't the very first one ever, and it's, I guess, as one of those days, one of those recurring days of observation, through no official conduct of any kind. It's just, all right, we named it. Yes, one of these days was, National Bavarian Pretzel Day. And not even in Bavaria, whatever. National Donut Day. Who makes these things? Very often, the donut guys say today's National Donut Day. And sometimes there's a presidential proclamation for more important things than Donut Day, typically. And transgender visibility may be one of those things. But even so, apparently, the thing about those days, those calendar days, is they're linked to a calendar day. Every March 31st, since whenever they first did this, is Transgender Visibility Day. You, with your Easter, moving around all the time, and you can't figure out when it is. You can. It's whatever. Was it the last, I don't know. I don't even know. I have no idea. But it's fixed on a Sunday, which is odd, but that's what they chose to do with their cats. It's your holiday. You do whatever you want with it, I guess. But at any rate, it's not always March 31st, but Transgender Visibility Day, I guess, is. Now, Easter's been around longer than Transgender Visibility Day, but what can you do? And it was coincidental. But no, it's not enough for Republicans. They are going to scream about it. Actually, Chris Geidner wrote something about it. And, he's usually good at describing these things. But, at the very least, he's compiled a whole lot of the Republican complaints alleging that Biden had something to do with it. So I don't know. Let's take a look and see what Chris says and see whether there was even any presidential role in it or whether he debunks it. But the trending Easter controversy, as he puts it in quotes, or how little lies pave the way for the next big lie. And it's an important concept all by itself. So let's read through it. No news weekend internet, I guess, is how we should call it, is stupid dangerous in the Trump era, as this weekend's attack on the Transgender Day of Visibility shows. And I guess, so I don't know whether there's an actual proclamation or not, but Joe Biden, in recognition of it, using Twitter, saying on Transgender Day of Visibility, "We celebrate the joy, strength, and absolute courage of some of the bravest people I know. Today, we show millions of transgender and non-binary Americans that we see them, they belong, and they should be treated with dignity and respect." And that's not inconsistent with an Easter message, unless you're Republican. This weekend's gaslighting from the right around Easter falling on the same day as Transgender Day of Visibility is a stark sign of how empty the Republican Party has gotten and how dangerous Donald Trump is, not only to transgender people, but to America in general, I would say. If you, blessedly, have no idea what I'm talking about, congratulations. You live a life free from what I think is best thought of as no news weekend internet. In short, when nothing is happening, something must happen. It will always be stupid, but in the past, sometimes that meant stupid fun. Now it means stupid dangerous. This time, it was two things. Easter moves around because it falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon on or after March 21st. I know that's kind of a dumb rule, but what are you going to do? Religion's full of dumb rules. It's interesting, though, that it's based on a lunar calendar. You crazy worshippers of the moon god. Transgender Day of Visibility, which was founded in 2009, in case you were wondering, I was, takes place on March 31st. Boom. March 31st, that's it. It wasn't Easter. It hasn't been Easter. But this year, again, because of the moon, Easter is on March 31st. Not because of Joe Biden, the moon. For a group of Republicans looking to demonize Joe Biden and transgender people, this was all they needed to start a weekend full of hate. Then, for kicks, I guess, they added an attack on the new rules from the White House The new rules for the White House Children's Egg Decorating Contest, specifically, that submissions can't be overtly religious. This was their second anti-Christian thing that Biden did, despite the fact that Biden administration didn't change any of the rules. I did see the Egg Council, which has some hand in sponsoring the White House Easter egg event, saying it's always been the rule. It was the rule during the Trump administration, too. But, of course, no one could go to the Easter egg event during the Trump administration because COVID. Anyway, well, they went earlier. And Sean Spicer wore the bunny suit or something like that. Anyway, it's disgusting and done in extremely bad faith, but also dangerous. And because of that danger, except it's Chris Geidner, not me, am going to go through what happened in detail and discuss why it's so disturbing. Good, let's do it. It's a radio show. On Friday morning, the Biden White House press office sent out this year's Transgender Day of Visibility proclamation, as they have done in the other years of his presidency. Okay, so there is a proclamation. But again, what are you going to do? It's March 31st every year, the end. So they've done it every other year. In fact, in 2022 and 2023, the White House press office also sent out a related fact sheet to highlight related administration accomplishments. Biden issues many similar and temporarily overlapping proclamations. He issued 11 on Friday, not just this one, addressing celebrations or commemorations for the days, weeks, and a month ahead. I guess is what you do come the end of March. You announce April is this blah, blah, blah month, and April 1st is blah, blah, blah day, and April 18th is going to be National, what have you, cream-filled confection day. I don't know. But he did issue 11 on Friday. There's a link here, by the way, in case we want to find out what they are. Let's see. A proclamation on National Sexual Assault Awareness and Prevention Month, which is, I guess, does that mean it's April? Watch out for that, because the other guy running for president is a sexual assault committer. A proclamation on National Donate Life Month, I guess, also coming up. Cesar Chavez Day, I guess, also in April. National Cancer Prevention and Early Detection Month. Arab American Heritage Month. National Public Health Week. National Child Abuse Prevention Month. Care Workers Recognition Month. Month of the Military Child. He's leaving out militaries. And Second Chance Month is just page 1 of what he was working on Friday. There's also Transgender Day of Visibility, obviously. An executive order, by the way, recognizing and honoring women's history, etc., etc., etc. So, these proclamations, there are many. They overlap. Sometimes it's National Donut Day and National Cronut Day. And then they, fight in the streets. It doesn't matter. You just do these things. Well, anyway, this one, it says, was handled differently. At 9:50 a.m. Saturday, Owen Schroyer, a conservative talk show host with 1776 in his username on Twitter, appears to have been one of the first people to take advantage of No News Weekend Internet, highlighting the proclamation, which in part reads, "Now, therefore, I, Joseph R. Biden Jr., President of the United States of America, by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, do hereby proclaim March 31st, 2024 as Transgender Day of Visibility." There's more upon it, but that's it. No, we're hanging that. Biden did it. Self-identified theocratic fascist, that's a self-identification for Matt Walsh, followed up with a quote retweet of Schroyer a little past noon, literally calling Biden, quote, a demon. This man is a demon, he did say. Presumably about him, although he was retweeting Owen Schroyer. So maybe Owen Schroyer is the demon, but I don't think that's what he meant. A Daily Wire staffer, Megan Basham, had already tweeted about it. Before that, even Scott Jennings, a CNN contributor, decided to send out his take on it. He's a former George W. Bush White House staffer and has been an advisor to Mitch McConnell. In case you thought there was a different branch of the Republican Party that wouldn't do this, there isn't. Many far-right figures, including, belatedly, libs of TikTok's Chaya Raichik, as well as Jack Posobiec, who, quote, retweeted her 12 minutes later, jumped on the hateful bandwagon as the day went on. It was not, however, left to right-wing trolls to share and exploit ignorance. Multiple sitting governors weighed in on it as well, including Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves. Kristi Noem, Speaker Johnson, I guess, got in on the act. The U.S. House Judiciary Committee, i.e. a Jim Jordan sock puppet account, was part of the effort with a tweet declaring that today is Easter, nothing else. By the way, I was laughing about all these evangelicals caught in a transgender Day of Visibility bar who thought I thought it was an Easter bar. Sorry, didn't realize that. Anyway, speakers weighed in with White House right-wing House Speaker Mike Johnson tweeting that recognizing the humanity of others is outrageous, abhorrent, and betrayed the central tenet of Easter, which it does not. It's been a while since I've been in a religion class, Chris says, but if memory serves, I think it's pretty clear that Jesus would be more likely to overturn the tables in Mike Johnson's house than be upset about Trans Day of Visibility. Newt Gingrich, I guess, also chimed in for some reason, saying it was a obscene insult to every Christian. And of course, Trump used it to attack Biden. This, of course, gave an excuse for sympathetic outlets to go all in. Fox News is obsessed with the story. Not linking to them, but a quick review found at least 5 stories related to this. Other right-wing media outlets covered this anger at the moon as well. Caitlyn Jenner wanted a moment of relevance again as well, so she tweeted away, which the New York Post covered as a news story because, no news weekend internet. On the secondary new rules issue, which Fox News is on board with attacking and was also covered by other right-wing outlets, by the way, they aren't new, these rules. The Egg Board had to step in, which is a sentence that I never thought I would write, as NBC News reported. Emily Metz, president and CEO of the American Egg Board, a group that supports the White House egg roll, among other things. Not the food egg roll, but, I would support that, by the way. Had said in a statement, the American Egg Board has been a supporter of the White House Easter egg roll for over 45 years, and the guideline language referenced in recent news reports has consistently applied to the board since its founding across administrations. It would be easy to ignore all of this, as many people undoubtedly did this weekend, while they were instead living their lives and celebrating Easter and or recognizing Trans Day of Visibility and or doing literally anything other than pretending that this is actually a matter worthy of concern, let alone a full-on attack, but for 2 things. First, this is happening in the midst of an ongoing set of legislative attacks on trans people, not to mention all the other attacks, physical and otherwise, that trans people face in their daily lives. There are a few ways to make more clear how much a Trans Day of Visibility is needed than to see the deranged, bad faith, hateful, anti-trans comments spewed by people from a radio host to the Speaker of the House over this weekend. And of course, as Chase Strangio explained, do I have the pronunciation right? This is just the smallest of starts. Trans visibility is nice. Safety is even better. Biden, for his part, did not fall for this, tweeting on Sunday about both Easter and the Transgender Day of Visibility. You can do both. Like an ordinary person without hate in their heart might be expected to do. Beyond this weekend and this incitement, moreover, is the reminder of how bad things are going to get over the next 7 to 10 months or longer, depending on how long they hold out as insurrectionists after the election, I guess. This was a 0 to 60 moment this weekend. And the right-wing outrage machine made something out of literally nothing, and everyone was all in. Now, think about the fall. Think about mail-in ballots. Think about election night and the aftermath. About a state decisive to the outcome of the election going to a recount, or state certifications, or think about the new Congress on January 6th, 2025. Think. I will have much more to say later about these concerns in the future, but this seemed like a key moment to show how prepared and aligned the right-wing media ecosystem and Republican Party are, highlight how absolutely and aggressively uninterested in the facts they are, and set the framework for how dangerous that is and could be. And that's always relevant, so I'm happy to share that. even though it was about a stupid story that should have had no traction whatsoever. But unfortunately, that's where you got to be these days. It reminded me though of something else, and now it's all beginning to fade away. What was I? Oh yes, right. I mentioned, and I guess I was reminded about it by this story and the first one that we read and spent the first half of the show on. There was, I don't remember what the bridge was from the first story, but this one reminds me, as Chris is discussing, how bad things are going to get and the weird ways in which they're going to manufacture outrage, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know. Now I'm already forgetting what the bridge is, but somebody was saying, oh yes, right. But you remember I mentioned in the first story that the conservatives were already laying the groundwork for arguing for a repeal of the 22nd Amendment so that Trump could remain president or run for president 18 times or whatever it is he's planning on doing, president for life, what have you. And someone had pointed out, and perhaps I can actually find that someone and give credit for it, but pointing out, everybody was, as they put it, dunking on, and rightly so, dunking on the publication. Here it is. MP Broach is the author of this, a political scientist, by the way, is I can't see now. I'm going to zoom in on the picture and find out. Yes, I'll assume gender based on appearances and take that risk, but how he identifies as a political scientist researching and teaching on IR, international law, mass atrocities, conflict data, etc. Okay, so a political science professor, presumably, and pointing out people are rightly dunking on the American conservatives' argument here about the 22nd Amendment and repealing it. But if the Supreme Court refuses to apply the plain text of the 14th Amendment, what's stopping them from applying refusing to apply the plain text of the 22nd? That's actually true. I mean, I guess why bother? If you can't succeed in repealing the 22nd Amendment, but Trump wants to run for president again, why don't you just say, it's not self-enforcing. There has to be a law passed against it or something like that in order for it to be effective. Or at least if you're planning on trying to keep Trump off the ballot, if he were to win a second term, but run for a third term, no states would be permitted to say that violates the 22nd Amendment. You're not getting on our ballot, according to current Supreme Court precedent anyway. So, that's kind of worth pointing out. Okay, so just thought I would bring that one up. I should probably open that that Blue Sky message up and mark it for sharing with all of you, so you can all look at MP Broach and assume gender as well. Why not? Okay. So let's see. A few other things that I have here that are definitely worth some mention. Another, I guess, example of, I guess maybe this undermines Chris Geidner's theory to some extent on the no news internet weekend. But I think he's got something there. But there's also the some news internet weekend and the some news internet weekdays. Like basically, we're never immune from having dumb stuff made up and becoming a thing among Republicans. Republican outrage is very, very easy to trigger and will assume the wrong thing very easily and be extremely dumb as a result. For instance, I'll sum it all up, or I'll let Vox sum it all up in the person of A.W. Olheiser, who wrote at the end of last week about the dumbness that we noted in passing about Republicans looking to, ignore all the facts, ignore all the fact pattern, blame the quote unquote collapse of the the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Baltimore, not the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Washington, D.C., but the other one, on something other than, I don't know, just basically an accident. A ship, a gigantic ship, rammed into it and tore it down. And there were all sorts of different permutations of this, from the ostensibly grounded idea but mistaken idea. Oh, well, the bridge collapsed. Like, first of all, reporting it as a bridge collapse made people think, oh, the bridge collapsed on its own. It was just poorly built, or was so old, or poorly maintained, or poorly designed, or something, that it just collapsed all by itself. And that must mean it was somehow DEI. Why DEI? Because, as people pointed out, that's the new way of getting away with saying the N-word when you want to blame something on blah people, as Rick Santorum used to say. And Baltimore, why, that's a blah city. They have lots of blah people in it. And the mayor, as a matter of fact, is blah as well, because why not? You know, he's representing a fairly substantial black population and doing so pretty remarkably well, so why not elect him? Well, anyway, they were looking to blame it on that, and it had nothing to do with it. It was a new bridge. It was built by a white administration. What do you want? Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kgrowx@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. All right, well, let's let Vox sort of tie up not only all of the nonsense about the nonsense metastasized. It was, well, it must have been something wrong with the structure of the bridge. Well, there was nothing wrong with the structure of the bridge. Well, a gigantic ship rammed into it. Well, then something must have been wrong with the people operating the ship, and they were the DEI N-word people. I don't know. I can't help you with this. This is all very stupid, and it metastasized in 10 different directions. They were just looking to blame somebody for something and to say DEI and to demonize it in some way, but it was also indicative of something bigger, and Vox, A.W. Olheiser here kind of synthesizes an entire line of thinking here for us, which I thought was very interesting, under the title of The Slow Death of Twitter is measured in disasters like the Baltimore Bridge collapse, which again, I mean, we have no other word for it. It did collapse, but I don't know. The Germans would just say collapsed because a bridge smashed into it as one word, and then that would solve the problem of the headline. Twitter, which they stupidly say is now X, but you can stop saying that. Forget it. Just leave it alone already. Was once a useful site for breaking news. The Baltimore Bridge collapse shows those days are long gone. So a different kind of point, but built around the first stupid thing that we were talking about a minute ago. So, A.W. Olheiser, by the way, there's a little bio up at the top. A senior technology reporter at Vox, writing about the impact of technology on humans and society. I'm a human. I'm in society. I love reading using technology, so this is all right up my alley. So that's how AW identifies pronoun-wise. They have also covered online culture and misinformation at the Washington Post, Slate, and the Columbia Journalism Review, among other places. They have an MA in religious studies and journalism from NYU. All right, interesting. I like the upfront. Like, now I know that the pronouns are correct. It's printed here for me, and I don't have to guess or say something dumb and do it wrong. Line up a few years' worth of tragedies and disasters, and the online conversation about them will reveal their patterns. The same conspiracy theory peddling personalities who spammed Twitter, and here they actually say X, and I'm just going to substitute Twitter because come on, who spammed Twitter with posts claiming that last Tuesday's Baltimore bridge collapse was a deliberate attack, that's one of the other dumb things I forgot about, have also called mass shootings false flag events and denied basic facts about the COVID-19 pandemic. A Florida Republican running for Congress blamed, quote, DEI for the bridge collapse as racist comments about immigration, and Baltimore Mayor Brandon Scott circulated among the far right. These comments echo Trump in 2019, who called Baltimore a, quote, disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess, unquote, and in 2015 blamed President Obama for unrest in the city. As conspiracy theorists compete for attention in the wake of a tragedy, any tragedy really, others seek engagement through dubious expertise, juicy speculation, or stolen video clips. The boundary between conspiracy theory and engagement bait is permeable. Unfounded and provoking posts often outpace the trickle of verified information that follows any sort of major breaking news event. Then the conspiracy theories become content, and a lot of people marvel and express outrage that they exist. Then they kind of forget about the raging river of bad internet until the next national tragedy. I've seen it so many times. I became a breaking news reporter in 2012, AW is saying, which means that in internet years I have the experience of almost an ancient entity. The collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge into the Patapsco River, though, felt a little different from most of these moments for me for two reasons. Three. One is a giant ship did it. Now the two reasons that AW mentions. First, it was happening after a few big shifts in what the internet even is. As Twitter, once a go-to space for following breaking news events, became an Elon Musk-owned factory for verified accounts with bad ideas, while generative AI tools have superpowered grifters wanting to make plausible text and visual fabrications. And second, I live in Baltimore. People I know commute on that bridge, which forms part of the city's beltway. Some of the workers who fell, now presumed dead, lived in a neighborhood across the park from me. So another section now called The Local Cost of Global Misinformation. On Tuesday evening, I called Lisa Snowden, the editor-in-chief of the Baltimore Beat, the city's black-owned alt weekly, and an influential presence in Baltimore's still pretty active Twitter community. I wanted to talk about how following breaking news online has changed over time. Snowden was up during the early morning hours when the bridge collapsed. Baltimore's Twitter presence is small enough that journalists like her generally know who the other journalists are working in the city, especially those reporting on Baltimore itself. Almost as soon as news broke about the bridge, though, she saw accounts she'd never heard of before speaking with authority about what had happened, sharing unsourced video and speculating about the cause. Over the next several hours, the misinformation and racism about Baltimore snowballed on Twitter. For Snowden, this felt a little bit like an invasion into a community that had so far survived the slow death of what was once Twitter by simply staying out of the spotlight. Baltimore Twitter, it's usually not as bad, Snowden said. She sticks to the people she follows. But today I noticed was pretty much impossible. It got extremely racist. And I was seeing other folks in Baltimore also being like, this might be what sends me finally off this app. Here are some of the tweets that got attention in the hours after the collapse. I don't even know if I can pronounce some of these names, but who cares? He's a bad guy. Paul Szypula, Szypula, a MAGA influencer with more than 100,000 followers on Twitter, tweeted, Synergy Marine Group, the company that owned the ship in question, promotes DEI in their company. Did anti-white business practices cause this disaster? Alongside a screenshot of a page of the company's website that discussed the existence of a diversity and inclusion policy. having nothing to do with this, of course. That tweet got more than 600,000 views. Another far-right influencer speculated that there was some connection between the collapse and, I guess, Barack Obama? I don't know. The tweet, linked to here, got 5 million views as of midday Wednesday. Being online during a tragic event is full of consequential nonsense like this, ideas and conspiracy theories that are inane enough to fall into the fog of Poe's law, and yet harmful to actual people and painful to see, in particular when it's your community being turned into views. What's Poe's law, by the way, in case you were wondering? I am. Links to a Washington Post article titled Porn, Nazis, and Sarcasm. How these 3 old rules basically explain the entire internet. And I guess here this is one of AW's own articles for the Post, only here identified in 2017 anyway as Abby Olheiser, but now going by AW. Anyway, Poe's law, is that outlined here? Oh yeah, here we are. Of the many old rules about the internet, 3 of them, Godwin's, we know that one, Poe's, and it says Rule 34, have managed to stay particularly useful for explaining basically the whole of internet culture. Appropriately, they cover irony, Nazis, and porn. Poe's law has its own section here. What is it? A message board user going by Nathan Poe defined it as, without a winking smiley or other blatant display of humor, it is utterly impossible to parody a creationist in such a way that someone won't mistake for the genuine article. That was stated in 2005, apparently. That small root started to become shorthand for a bigger idea. Places like 4chan and Reddit started invoking Poe's law over the past decade. It becomes a general rule that you can't tell someone's motives and intentions unless you know who you're talking to. Okay, interesting. Now back to the Vox article from Olheiser. Being online during a tragic event is full of consequential nonsense like this. Just to restate it, ideas and conspiracy theories that are inane enough to fall into the fog of Poe's law and yet harmful to actual people and painful to see, in particular when it's your community being turned into views. Sure, there are best practices you can follow, herein linked, to try to contribute to a better information ecosystem in these moments. Those practices matter, but for Snowden, the main thing she can do as her newsroom gets to work reporting on the impact of this disaster on the community here is let time march on. In a couple of days, this terrible racist mob or whatever it is going to be on to something else. And I guess they are. Trans Day of Visibility. Baltimore people are still going to need things. Everybody's still going to be working, so I'm just kind of waiting it out, she said. But it does hurt. So, and that's it. It's a brief article. We did manage to get it in, and we'll have time to move on to something else as well. But just interesting to view it as alongside and as part of the collapse of Twitter. And we have yet to see how that's going to play out in the next election. But we can imagine already how bad it's going to be. There's going to be a whole social media site dedicated to generating this kind of bad faith rumors. In fact, there will be several. Twitter was the one where there was, at least the presence of some level-headed normie community that could say, as widely spread as this rumor is, it's extremely dumb. But now all of Twitter will be basically dedicated to that, along with Truth Social and Gab and whatever other right-wing alternatives were created and might still survive. Okay, other news of some importance to share here. I just wanted to at least note, if nothing else, just the headline, but letting you know the Washington Post was reporting that over in Israel, things are happening. Families of Israeli hostages still being held in Gaza join protests calling for Netanyahu to go. Can't blame them for that. Hard not to be sympathetic, right? Shira Rubin and Louisa Loveluck are the byliners on this Sunday piece. I'll give you some flavor of what's going on here. Tens of thousands of demonstrators flooded Israel's streets for a second straight Sunday, calling for immediate elections and for the government to urgently negotiate the release of more than 100 hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza, or at least believed to be held. We have yet to find out whether any of them are still alive here at this point. The twin demands represented a merging of two distinct protest movements. One, including the families of hostages. The other, led by civil society and the political opposition, which could become the greatest threat yet to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right government. We hope so at this point. But interesting that the two are merging. There was, of course, that existing protest movement that had Israelis out in the street for months prior to the October 7th attacks, and has been tamped down on since. And, of course, now the burgeoning families of hostages movement, which is likewise being tamped down on, but this time, in fact, actively suppressed by police in Israel, which will probably also wake up a few minds to, a parallel situation that might be of interest. Anyway, on Sunday, the protesters moved from Hostage Square Plaza in Tel Aviv, I guess self-declared Hostage Square because the government would never agree to it, to the parliament in Jerusalem, waving Israeli flags and chanting for the removal of the country's longest-serving leader. From inside the building, Netanyahu addressed his critics in a prime-time address. "The pain of the families of the hostages breaks my heart. I think it breaks all of our hearts," he said. "Anyone who says that I'm not doing everything to bring back our hostages is wrong and is misleading others. The calls for elections right now at the height of the war, a moment before victory, will paralyze Israel for at least half a year," he added, "and the first person to celebrate this will be Hamas." Which I thought you destroyed or something? Okay, but whatever. Outside the Knesset, Karmi Palsi Katzir, whose brother Elad Katzir was dragged into Gaza from kibbutz Nir Oz on October 7th, decried what she said was the failure of the government. "I would have never believed that after 6 months I would need to fight with the government for my brother's right to return alive or to return at all," she said. She cited testimonies from released hostages indicating that her brother, at least at first, had been able to listen to the radio and watch television in captivity. "What does he think about us as a society, about our prime minister?" she wondered. The event on Sunday was the start of a 4-day rally that organizers hope will either force the government to jumpstart hostage negotiations or lead to the collapse of Netanyahu's coalition, the most right-wing in the country's history. Netanyahu is already under growing pressure from Washington, Israel's most important weapons supplier and diplomatic backer. American officials have expressed growing alarm about the war in Gaza, including Israel's planned offensive on the southern city of Rafah, home to 1.4 million displaced Palestinians, and the humanitarian crisis in the north and the south, everywhere really, where Israeli restrictions on aid deliveries have put hundreds of thousands of people on the brink of starvation. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer warned this month that Israel risked becoming an international pariah under Netanyahu's leadership and urged the country to hold new elections. Netanyahu had largely been insulated from external pressure by an Israeli public that overwhelmingly supported the war and until now at least had no appetite for wartime elections, but the tide could be shifting. And that's the important part, and we hope so. On Saturday in Tel Aviv, Einav Zangauker, my goodness, it's a tough one, whose 24-year-old son Matan is held in Gaza, blamed the prime minister for torpedoing a deal for a temporary ceasefire that would have allowed Israeli hostages to be exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. "You stand between us and bringing our loved ones home," she said, addressing Netanyahu. Saturday's mass street demonstrations in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other cities were led by the Hostage Families Forum, an umbrella organization for the relatives of hostages. Since the beginning of the war, the families have been told by the government that only military pressure would bring their loved ones home. They refrained from issuing political statements, instead sharing testimonies from former captives and offering condolences as hostage death notifications trickled in. Nearly 6 months after October 7th, many families have received no official information about their relatives held in Gaza. Some have had requests to meet with Netanyahu and the war cabinet denied. Many say their trust in government has evaporated. The families of the hostages have reached a breaking point with Netanyahu, said Josh Drill, a leader of a group called Change Generation, which since October 7th has called for the release of the hostages and a new Israeli government. The decision by some families to join the anti-government movement is not inherently political, he said. We're simply doing all we can to get loved ones home, and they now recognize that Netanyahu is an obstacle to that. Several hostage families joined a more general anti-government protest as it blocked Tel Aviv's main highway Saturday night. They lit bonfires in the street and were among 16 people arrested as police unleashed water cannons on the crowds. On Sunday night, demonstrators again clashed with police as they blocked main roads in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The scenes were reminiscent of the tumultuous months that preceded October 7th, in which hundreds of thousands of Israelis protested a government campaign to weaken the judicial system, and now protesters say the stakes are even higher. Our country is being led by a gang of nutcases that jeopardize not only our existence, but our well-being, said Shaul Dweck, 70, who joined the crowds in Jerusalem on Sunday with his wife, Netta. This is not the way we grew up, and these are not the values that we hold. Sounds familiar, actually. Gili Amar, a 29-year-old musician, wanted more clarity about what the decision-makers are doing and what their objectives are. On Sunday, Israel sent a low-level delegation to Cairo to resume indirect truce talks with Hamas. In the negotiations process, the heads of Mossad, Israel's national intelligence agency, and Shin Bet, Israel's internal security service, will join them, according to an Israeli official who spoke on condition of anonymity. But families have seen round after round of talks fail. They fear that time has already run out. The hostages will not hold out there. No one can survive what they're going through there, said Raz Ben Ami, who was released during a temporary ceasefire in late November at the Saturday night rally in Tel Aviv. Prime Minister, on behalf of the hostage men and women, on behalf of the people of Israel, give the negotiators in Qatar the order. Do not return without a deal. Nearly every week now, there are new testimonies from former hostages about the abuse they endured at the hands of their captors and the fears they have for those still inside. Liri Albag, 19, who had been kept in subterranean tunnels and in private homes, according to the testimonies passed on to the Albag family from released hostages, was forced to cook and clean for those keeping her. The hostages had to prepare food, but they themselves could not eat. Shira Albag, Liri's mother, told Israel's public broadcaster last week, and I'm sure food shortages only prompted that and made it worse. Aviva Siegel was among the first of the released hostages to testify about sexual assault in captivity, telling a Knesset hearing in January that the captors dressed the hostages as dolls, watched them shower, and subjected both men and women to sexual and physical abuse. On Saturday, she said the government needed to stop treating hostage negotiations as a children's game. Do you hear me, Bibi? She said, using Netanyahu's nickname. Stop talking about victory. Stop talking about military pressure. Nothing will work. Nothing has worked until now. They're dying there every day. And everybody's dying there every day. And anything that could bring an end to that, worth exploring, and something Netanyahu will shun entirely without being forced from office. So, just wanted to put that one on the record, and that's just among many that needs attention. Let's see, a couple of other things that are still relevant that we haven't been able to get on the record, but which we really need to. Holy moly. Let's see, which ones will we go with on this one? How about over to the public offering of the Truth Social merged company between Digital World Acquisition and Trump Media to launch the public offering on Truth Social. Some weird things happening, weird market anomalies at work, like giving tremendous value to this company that has never made any money. But, that's the way it is with IPOs in general. I understand that there's news this morning. I haven't seen any printed stories about it just yet, although they're probably out there. They came out during the course of the show, that the forms filed that were necessary to file with the SEC along with this IPO, what are they called? 8Ks, is that right? Apparently indicate that so far no give from the board on releasing Trump himself from the prohibition against his early sale of stock. The original agreement was he couldn't sell stock within 6 months of the initial public offering, and they're not bending on that. There was some anticipation that they might waive that so that he could cash in and pay his fines and bonds, but I don't know. He may have waved them off on that and said, no, I'm enjoying being the victim of these things and not paying them. And I never intend to pay them anyway. So, whatever. And not waiving this prohibition will help stabilize, to the extent it's possible to stabilize a fraud stock. But it'll help retain its value. But you might be wondering what's going on with that or why it's valuable at all. And the answer is there's no real reason. CBS News wrote this up end of last week. Trump's Truth Social platform soars in second day of trading on NASDAQ. That's the unfortunate truth of it. Former President Donald Trump's Truth Social began trading under the ticker DJT on Tuesday, putting the real estate tycoon and his initials at the helm of a publicly traded company once again. Trump Media and Technology Group shares soared in their second day of trading, rising $8.23 or 14.2% to $66.22 on Wednesday. That follows a gain of 16% on Tuesday when the company began trading on NASDAQ. The gains give Trump Media and Technology Group a market value of $9.4 billion for no reason. No reason whatsoever. Trump, who owns 58% of the newly public company, now has a stake valued at $5.2 billion, at least on paper. The company, whose main asset is the social media service, Truth Social, has captured the attention of both critics and supporters, with some investors buying stock to express their support for the former president. Others are retail investors who want to cash in on the mania rather than big institutional and professional investors. We got to find out how you can buy what are the put options so we can bet on we would win in the crash, the eventual crash of this company. But I don't know how to do it. The company whose main asset is that social media. Oh, yes, that's right. We just read this one. DJT has all the makings of a meme stock, given the Trump news factor, noted Ben Emmons, senior portfolio manager and head of fixed income at New Edge Wealth. In a Tuesday research note, for global macro investors, DJT will be a proxy for how markets price Trump 2.0 policies. Trump Media is now the most expensive stock to short in the U.S., according to Bloomberg News. Short selling, which involves betting that a specific stock will decline, is pricey for Trump's company because there are few shares available to borrow, and there's high interest in betting against the company, the report noted. So it's not that easy. On Truth Social Tuesday, users were posting about being shareholders or seeking tips on how to buy shares. One user urged conservatives to get behind DJT stock and sent it over $100 per share to drive the liberals insane. Another declared, get yourself a piece of DJT stock if you're a true MAGA supporter. You go. So you could have guessed that this was happening. On Monday, Trump told reporters that Truth Social's doing very well. It's hot as a pistol and doing great. And on Tuesday, more garbage about it, backing it up, pumping in preparation for dumping, I guess, which is something that Trump is always prepared to do. Despite the enthusiasm, and that prompts us to use a fun sound effect on our way out the door here. Despite the enthusiasm, investors could experience a bumpy ride. For one, they're betting on a company with uncertain financial prospects. Trump Media lost $49 million in the first 9 months of last year when it brought in just $3.4 million in revenue and had to pay $37.7 million in interest expenses. So you might wonder why a company like that is worth several $billion when it has revenue of just $3.4 million. Oh, I don't know, 10,000 times revenue seems normal, right? Trump Media and Technology Group said in a statement on Monday that the ticker symbol would be active on Tuesday. I guess this is nonsense we don't really necessarily care about. The important point, and really, at this point, not only do we have to leave, but we should jump out of this thing. The basics of it are that, yes, Truth Social is a big money loser. There's a whole section on that. It's a tiny section. To be sure, plenty of tech companies have gone public while in the red, they point out. Yet typically investors want to see that a business can grow its user base and ramp up sales quickly by appealing to a broad range of advertisers. Truth Social, which doesn't release its user numbers, had roughly 5 million visits in February, according to research firm SimilarWeb. By comparison, Reddit, which went public last week, which would be 2 weeks ago, I guess, had about 73.1 million daily active users last year, while revenue jumped 21% to $804 million in 2023, as it reported last month ahead of its IPO filing. Nothing even remotely in that neighborhood on the Truth Social side. So it remains pretty much a meme stock, and I guess we can all, even if we can't get in on borrowing the stocks to short, we can all, watch in amazement if it doesn't fall, or I guess share the cheap thrills if it does. Now, speaking of sharing cheap thrills, why not stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, which is not cheap and not easy to produce either. Justice Putnam has put together his story, collection of stories from around the country and around the world to entertain and inform, following us right here on Netroots Radio.
From netrootsradio.com.
That's the place.
You have been listening to K-Grow in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, let's see. Frantic as hell, Trump tries to test the no-nonsense judge in New York by going after his daughter. I told you he was already on that. And then, let's see, in a grave mistake backwards, Facebook owner Meta is decommissioning a vital digital tool that tracks viral falsehoods during this crucial election year. Stay tuned.